Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fridays with Steve. I am, I guess, your host, right? I'm Steve Thompson with Apex Digital Solutions. Thanks for joining us. And today we've got a fun topic for me. This was always one of my favorites, talking to customers about security, data loss prevention, data loss protection, really worrying about data in motion is really one of those easy to understand. Microsoft's made it a lot easier to implement kinds of solutions. And it's one of those ones when I talk to customers that is just really big on low hanging fruit, really easy to get some quick wins in the space, do some things that are really going to make a material difference in how you protect and govern your data, and be able to do it quickly. So let's go ahead and get started and just talk a little bit about today. So we'll talk about data in motion. For some reason, I'm not sure how it happened. I just ended up with this sort of paradigm of data at rest, data in motion. Last time we talked about rest, things like encryption, things like discovery, using tools to find data that you want to protect in your environment, rules to protect it as well. And data in motion is this side, saying, hey, let's not share or transmit data via channels that we want to protect. And I've got a number of screenshots. I did screenshots instead of a real live demo, just so as an asset, I can share this with customers, share this with you, so you can kind of see what it looks and feels like. If we have a chance to work together, I would show you real time via your own tenant or via something like Transform, where I can do some demo tenants and be able to show you this in action. Talk a little bit about the why. We'll talk about how it protects us from both inside and outside kinds of risks. I get to use my favorite stump the class question ever invented when we talk about this, and then talk a little bit about working with Apex and what we bring to the table and how we can help. So, the last 3 years have really accelerated this zero trust journey. All of us working from multiple locations has really changed the nature of how we think about security, right? I talked to a customer earlier this week, one that has multiple locations, sort of in that retail space, and VPNs and firewalls and the things they were used to doing historically around their multiple locations is really changing, right? And we talked about being on that journey to zero trust, saying, hey, I need to protect this stuff, wherever it might be, wherever the endpoint is, whoever the user is, and doing that at the data and at the channel level is really, really critical. And so Microsoft, sort of thinks about this in multiple areas, right? You have to understand and govern the data. We talked a little bit about that last week as well. You want to safeguard it wherever it's at. If it's internal to you, on OneDrive, in SharePoint. What about when it's in Exchange? How do we handle it differently? Or even local on machines, extending the footprint of the data you can look after all the way to endpoints using Defender. And then improving compliance and risk posture. A lot of customers are sort of taking a serious look at understanding risk, right? That unification of likelihood and exposure, right? Hey, we might get hit by a meteor, but it's pretty low probability, so I'm not going to put up some sort of you know force field above our data center. You have to balance the two things. How likely are these things, and what's the outcome going to be if it happens? Unfortunately, in security, both of those things, the amount of dollars lost due to downtime, due to ransomware, and the likelihood, they both seem to be increasing. And so, Microsoft takes this approach of really understanding your data. Really, the first step is knowing what's out there, getting it into the places that you can control it. I think I have to do a future episode about MCAS and cloud up security and how you can use tools like that to say, hey, get that stuff off Dropbox and get it into OneDrive, or what applications are people using, software as a service that I don't know about. And so getting it, knowing it and discovering it, getting it to where you can protect it, then go ahead and preventing data loss, whether it's accidental or malicious sharing of information, or simply, I kind of even map some of the retention policies, some of the versioning kinds of capabilities into this as well, right? How much data recovery can we make as close to the user as possible? And then do this over time. I've worked with a lot of customers who have a lot of these tools, have even implemented a lot of these policies, but nobody's sort of checking the logs. And that's a key component of really having a holistic strategy in this space. And so we want to prevent this data loss, whether it's, device based, we have to manage these devices and do this in a centralized way. We want the employees to have an integrated experience. I've got a couple of screenshots of what this looks like, how you can control these policies and make them approachable for users, right? I'll even talk about sort of test mode and how we can use that to train our end users. And then, when the alerts happen, what do we do with them? How do we find out about them? How do we remediate them? All these things are key to the overall strategy of preventing data loss. And that's where Purview and, historically, I think of, DLP is kind of its own product, but it's all under this umbrella of Purview now, and really a suite of tools that are provided as a part of Office or M365 to really make you more secure. So having this holistic approach is important. Another thing that's important is not trying to boil the ocean, right? That's one of the reasons I think I get such a kick out of DLP is in 10 minutes, we usually, with a customer can either talk through, sort of model a policy that will help them, or frankly, let's sit down at the console and let's go ahead and put it in place. Maybe only in test mode, but we can put something in place relatively quickly, right? Just in layman or conversational, terms. How about we have a policy that says no one can email a spreadsheet with more than 100 credit card numbers to anyone outside the organization? Hey, customer, is that something you're interested in, right? Putting on my used car salesman hat. Most of them are like, yeah, that seems like a pretty reasonable first policy to put in place, right? And that's relatively easy to implement, right? And so you're not boiling the ocean. You can start with those tactical, hey, what's the 80-20 rule kinds of things that we want to put in place quickly. And DLP policy works in a way that's really friendly to that, right? You'll see the policy creation is approachable even for someone like me. And so, it's really around unauthorized sharing, or honestly, guys, more the accidental side, saying, how do we, protect people from themselves? How do we ensure that the policies in the manual that everybody's supposed to read are actually enforced in a meaningful way, right? And we can do this across the cloud, across endpoints, even some non-Microsoft apps. That's where the MCAS piece comes in, as well as on-premise services. One quick example from my history working at Microsoft, being a Microsoft partner, I had a colleague that shared pipeline information. This is back maybe almost 20 years ago now. And what we would do is we would take, Excel spreadsheets, it was Microsoft, and we would say, hey, show me all of this partner's pipeline. Okay, great. Now let's share that with that partner so that when the business review comes up, we can talk about it. Well, we discovered that one of our fellow employees, another person in sales at Microsoft, was simply, hiding the rows that dealt with all the other partners in the territory and sending those to the partners. And thankfully, eventually, one of them shared with us, hey, we can just go unhide all these rows. And and be able to see everybody else's pipeline. That's the kind of thing. Wasn't malicious. It was an education. It was an error kind of situation, and those happen, right? And having something like DLP that's very friendly in how it approaches the end user, how it guides them. It can be the hammer, or it can be a policy tip. And having those kinds of options make it super, super friendly for both admins and end users. And like I said, makes it one of my favorites. So thinking about sort of the ease, guided onboarding, right out of the box, you're going to have analytics around some of the things that are going on. There's lots of built-in sensitive information types. We talked about this last go around as well. Hey, the system already knows how to look for credit card numbers and social security numbers and driver's license numbers, and the kind of sensitive information types that a lot of us face and want to manage. Based in the cloud, a part of a lot of the M365 or O365 footprints we're already using. Manage the policies all in one place. Super friendly interface. You'll see that here in a second. But at the same time, a ton of flexibility and granularity when it comes to creating these policies. I talked about that sort of my first policy a couple of minutes ago, and that one's easy because it's pretty universal, right? You can say, hey, I don't want anybody sending, a crap ton of credit card numbers to anyone outside this organization. That just seems bad on its face. But sometimes things get a little bit more granular, right? Well, what about credit card number sharing internally with the finance department, right? All of a sudden you start putting different criteria on it, and the nature changes a little bit. And so we'll see how flexible we can be with some of these policies. 100 plus built-in sensitive information types. When I used to deliver CIEs, that was always my joke. Every time I would go in, we'd play a game of, hey, last time I looked, it was 92. All right, this time it's 94, right? They were always updating the list. There's built-in policy templates as well. The highlight here is one around GDPR. And so one of the nice things that Microsoft introduced way back in the day that we made fun of at first were things like wizards, next, finish. But in this case, it's kind of nice not to start with a blank slate sometimes. Hey, I've got a built-in policy that gets you started around HIPAA or around managing PII. And so having those policy templates is huge. The last one is we can also use labels as conditions in DLP. I talked about this last time as well, which is to say, if you are using labeling within the environment, DLP doesn't have to look for a sensitive information type. It can simply say, well, how is this document labeled? How is this information labeled? If it's labeled sensitive, if it's labeled top secret, if it's labeled Project Obsidian, we can handle it differently in DLP just based off the label you've either manually assigned or auto assigned to information. And then I talked about, great. Now what happens when things occur and I need to understand what's going on or do remediation or do end user education? And so you've got sort of that cohesive view, right? We always dream of this one pane of glass to sort of, rule them all. And, we get close to it, then, we back away from it just because things get more complex or more tools, and in this space, if you're using DLP, you do have something that really centralizes your view of what's going on in the environment. And that can be super, super critical. Also, integration via API to SIEM tools. Obviously, if you're using Sentinel, that's an easy one, right? That's an out of the box kind of integration. But if you're using other tools as well, there's opportunities to integrate this data into the security products you're using. And then I've got some additional screenshots that kind of show us that end user experience and how it's integrated, how it's friendly. You can even customize some of the messages and so forth reminding myself to talk about that customization when I talk about testing, because there's some really, really clever things that you can do when it comes to rollout and when it comes to user education. And so experiences built in, policy tips, saying, hey, this looks gnarly. Just be aware that you're not going to be able to send this via email or something like that. And then that ability to use and manifest these tools for your end users across platforms, right? As some of you either now or in previous editions of the show have figured out, I'm a Mac user, right? That doesn't matter. We're still under the umbrella of the policies that Apex has set up for all of us employees. And having that flexibility to know that these things are going to work across mobile, across desktop and laptop, across web, is super, super powerful. So let's take a look at some of what this feels like. I'll start out on the admin side and kind of talk through a few of the screens, offer a few thoughts and best practices, kind of from my experience, both talking to customers and implementing these things. So first off, I talked about those templates, HIPAA, PII, GDPR. We've got a number of policy templates that are out there. So you're just not starting from a blank sheet of paper, right? Thinking back to school, it's always easier to start with an outline or start with a draft versus, sitting down with the blank blue essay book. And so you have the ability to start from templates. You also have the ability to say, oh, I'm starting from scratch, right? I'm building something where I want to not just control everything, but maybe have some special utility in mind. First step is naming the policy, and you're wondering why I'm about to pause here, is best practice, that description field. I'm always a little bit bummed that it's not required, because I think it should be. And it should be our opportunity as IT administrators, as IT experts and leaders, to document our code, right? My joke is that, I stopped writing code to deploy applications and working at Target in 1998. I have a strong suspicion that at least until fairly recently, little bits of my code were running around that environment because nobody knew what they did, right? And so, my best practice here is use that description field very robustly. Policy created, February 17th by Steve Thompson in response to the CIO yelling at me and wanting to ensure that this bad thing never happens again. Version 1, here's my phone number, right? Put rich text in there. It'll help the next person, the next person in your role. It'll help yourself in the future when you go, why did we build this? What was this for? Who asked for this? Use that description field robustly. And so then we talk about, hey, where can we put this policy in place, right? Again, I talked about, hey, don't email a bunch of credit card numbers outside, right? But we have the granularity to turn these platforms on and off, as well as do includes and excludes. And that's where you start to get and be able to build this granularity to say, hey, I'm going to treat things different on the finance SharePoint site than I'm going to treat them on all others. Or I'm going to leverage, and I think that's the shot I have here, I'm going to leverage Cloud App Security, who's doing discovery of software as a service applications, third-party ones, and I'm going to apply it to those guys as well. And so you can see we've got some ability to reach into third-party applications and have our policy extend to them. MCAS is a fun tool. Note to self, note to our marketing team, I definitely want to talk about it here in the near future because it's just, it's some very, very cool stuff. And so, if we started from a template, we can just say, hey, review and customize, or do we want to just start from scratch, right? First off, hey, what information are we going to protect? And you can see the example here is sensitive information type, credit card number, like I talked about earlier. And then there's this detect when content is shared from Microsoft 365 with people outside or inside my organization, which leads to my all-time stumper. I think I've only had a couple customers get it without a bunch of prompting, which is, well, how do you do both? How do you say I want to check for both? And the weird answer is you uncheck the box. What that box is a filter. And so if you don't want to filter it to either inside or outside, you leave the filter turned off. I don't know what diabolical dev in Redmond, Washington decided this was the way to present the what if you want everything perspective, but he's given me a nice little anecdote that I've used probably about 6,000 times. And so here's where we can set up the sensitive information types we're looking for. You can see credit card number, EU debit card number, so sensitive information types. But we can also add more sensitive information types, but we can also add sensitivity labels. And so if you're using the labeling pieces that we talked about last go around, they present themselves in your DLP policies. And so imagine a world where you're doing auto labeling or manual labeling around classified information, top secret, sensitive. Maybe it's project related, specific, code word projects. Those labels manifest themselves in DLP, so we can use them as a part of our policies. It's a pretty powerful tool. And then it's like, all right, so now what are we going to do when it happens? And what about policy tips? Do we want to send email notifications? The middle one, detect when a specific amount of sensitive information is being shared. This is a pretty powerful one and one subject to tuning, right? Saying, well, one credit card number is probably an absent-minded, dad sharing the credit card number with his spouse to sign the kids up for soccer. Hey, I forgot to leave you the credit card we want to use for soccer fees this year. Here's the number and the expiration date and the CCV. Not a bright idea, but one credit card number might catch a lot of sort of non-malicious, personal or sort of just banal knuckleheaded conversations versus this is a breach. This is someone trying to share our customer credit card list. And so you can set up an instance count, right? Subject, I think, to some tuning and to some experimentation. And then, based on that, hey, what are we going to do? Alerts, incident reports, restrict access. What's our reaction going to be? We can customize this, say, hey, who are we going to notify? The owners of SharePoint sites or accounts who tried to do it, additional people. If you've got an admin distribution list or something like that, you want to be able to react quickly. You can customize the email. And then at the bottom, you can customize the policy tip. So just remember that. I'm gonna circle back around to that here when we end the policy and talk about that test mode that we can customize the policy tip. And then what, are we going to let people override the policy? And if we override the policy and require a business justification, hey, I see this is tripping our policy. Here's why it makes sense. My boss told me to send it, right? You'll see a screenshot of that when we talk about the end user. And then on the Windows devices, DLP is expanding its footprint to be able to say, hey, of this sensitive information type, let's go ahead and block, copy and paste. Let's go ahead and block copy to a thumb drive. And then the restrict third-party apps, when we scroll down further on that same screen, hey, what are we going to do when we find those hits on Box or G Suite or WebEx or whatever it might be? What actions are we going to take because we have that MCAS integration? So you can see that sort of filled out here to extend those actions, to extend the DLP footprint to those third-party applications. And so then, what used to be a binary choice, hey, do you want this thing on or off when we save it? Now you have on, off, and you know what? Let's just test it out. And test it out is an incredibly powerful tool. So you turn the policy on, but it's not going to block. It's not going to drive, it's not going to bring the hammer down, but it's going to start filling your logs with how much this is happening. Couple of quick stories. I've heard customers use this to convince management, hey, we need this. They'll no, secretly, that makes it sound a little bit, sort of malicious. They will quietly turn on a policy that's just in test mode. And then their next monthly status with the CIO say, hey, do you realize there were 47 instances where someone sent social security numbers to people outside the organization? That seems bad, doesn't it? And use it as a way to sort of kick off a policy conversation. That checkbox for show policy tips is the piece I wanted to come back to. A great rollout strategy. So best practice. When you turn something on in test mode and turn on the policy tips, customize the policy tip to say something like, effective March 1st, sharing information of this type outside the organization will be blocked. If you have any questions or concerns about the implementation of this policy, please call extension 4400. So you can, in that test mode, use policy tips to start the coaching and the user education, or maybe finding blockers, finding that business group that's like, hey, this is part of our standard operating procedure. Before you turn this on, we need to figure out a better way or a different way. So review your policy and turn it on, and off it goes. Real quick. So again, as you think through that, there's some low-hanging fruit, I think, for all of us when we think about protecting the environment. I also grabbed a couple of screenshots, that were just kind of some of those end user experiences saying, hey, I found data, you can override it, but, I have approval and you have to give me a business justification. And then I can review those business justifications or report it to the admin as a false positive. And so this is sort of that interaction that your end user might see in a policy that's hitting instance, right? It looks like you're sharing information, and this is how one policy can be designed to handle it with end users. We can also see sort of that copy and paste saying, hey, you know what, you shouldn't do this, right? If you're going to allow it, I'm going to note it, and then you can go forward. Oftentimes, rather than hard blocks, these policy tips, hey, you're doing something that we don't think you're supposed to be doing. Are you sure? That's what helps correct those mistakes of sort of omission, right? Like not the malicious thing, not the conscious thing. The like, oh, that's right, I'm not supposed to do this with this kind of document. And so it can be a powerful tool just as a reminder and just as a point back to the policies that you do have, flat out, let's block it. You're not going to put this on a thumb drive, right? Again, so as DLP extends out to Windows and endpoint devices, you can even take it further than sort of those content channels, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. You can extend it to, Windows itself or the end user themselves and say, hey, we don't allow this. You're going to have to find, well, hopefully not find a different way. But if, in the case of a malicious person, you're making it much, much, much harder. And you're also getting alerts as they try to do these things. But for 99% of the time, it's that accident about to happen that you're helping avoid, right? Here's a web experience. So when we use MCAS, Cloud App Security, to extend the footprint of DLP, we can even get this experience within third-party applications that people are using. MCAS starts with application discovery, but then once you've discovered what people are up to, Dropbox or Renegade, G Suite users, or I didn't know this business unit is using SAP, those kinds of things, then you can both manage and control them as needed. And so, we're here to help, whether it's consultative engagements or implementation proof of concepts to full on managed services. We'd love to be your partner in this zero trust journey. We've done a lot of these engagements for customers, and super excited to talk to new customers about how we can engage with you. So, like always, reach out to me directly, sthompson@apexdigital.com. Reach out to your account executive if you're already a customer. If you're looking to connect with us, reach out to sales at apexdigital.com, or just drop me a direct note. We've also got a number of assets. In addition to the recordings of these, we have a number of assets that can help you sort of self-serve in your journey, but would love to hear from customers as their needs progress and as you think Apex can be your partner in this space. So as you can see, I love DLP. I think it's a fun topic. I think if you have it in your environment, you're missing out if you don't have a couple of those basic policies, like, hey, how about nobody sends the customer list unencrypted to an email recipient outside the environment? All right, let's write that policy. Let's sit down and make that happen. So thanks again for joining us. I appreciate your time today and look forward to seeing you the next time on Fridays with Steve.